company that was making it folded, and the movie disappeared, and I was crushed. And the next thing I knew, they said, "Oh, Disney picked up this film."
When we think of Pretty Woman, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the glamorous love story between Richard Gere's Edward and Julia Roberts' Vivian. A charming corporate raider falls for a street-smart escort, and against all odds, they find love in a world filled with class divides. It's become a classic, the ultimate fairy tale romance.
Come see here. This is Hollywood, the land of dreams. Some dreams come true, some don't.
But did you know that Pretty Woman was almost a completely different movie? In fact, it started off as a much darker, grittier script that could have changed the film world forever.
Threw her out of the car, threw the money on top of her, as memory serves, and just sort of drove away, leaving her in some dirty alley.
The original script for Pretty Woman was actually called 3000.
I auditioned for this movie that was called 3000, which was the amount of money that he paid her for their time together.
A title that hints at how far from the rom-com we all know and the love story initially was. The film wasn't the lighthearted fairy tale romance that we're familiar with. Instead, it was a bleak and hard-hitting drama about a sex worker named Vivian, who was depicted as a drug addict struggling to survive on Hollywood Boulevard. The story was rough, real, raw, and unpolished. And believe it or not, the original ending didn't involve a happy ever after. The first version of Pretty Woman was rated R and much darker. Vivian's life was tragic, and in an earlier draft, she actually dies from a drug overdose. The film was focused on the brutal reality of sex work, portraying her as a hardened, world-weary character, rather than the quirky, lovable heroine we came to know. The darker tone wasn't just about Vivian either. Edward, the corporate raider, played by Richard Gere, wasn't a charming businessman in the first draft. Instead, he was more of a detached, manipulative figure, using Vivian as a plaything, with no real emotional connection. When Disney's Jeffrey Katzenberg and the filmmakers realized how bleak the original script was, it became clear that they had to make some major changes if they wanted the movie to appeal to a wider audience. And that's when things started to shift. The change from 3000 to Pretty Woman happened relatively quickly, but it wasn't without its so-called changes. The film's new direction would have to be a lot more audience-friendly, and let's face it, a lot more romantic. So the story was reworked, the characters were softened, and the ending was completely reimagined. The character of Vivian was no longer a tragic, drug-addicted figure. Instead, she became a woman with a heart of gold, someone with ambition and the desire to better herself. The tone shifted from dark and gritty to light and hopeful. The once manipulative Edward became a man who, over the course of the film, would experience growth and change.
That's good. 7 fines since we left the match.
The transactional nature of their relationship was replaced with a genuine connection, and instead of leaving Vivian heartbroken on the streets, Edward swooped in to rescue her in a famous scene that has become iconic in movie history. It wasn't just the characters who were changed, the entire tone of the film was altered. Pretty Woman went from being a gritty, art house drama to a mainstream rom-com that became a box office smash. One reason Pretty Woman worked so well after the changes were made is that it took a familiar narrative, the boy meets girl trope, and flipped on its head. In this version, it wasn't just Edward who had been saved. Vivian, in her own way, rescued him. Rather than just the classic man saves woman, this story was about both characters learning from each other and growing together. It was a refreshing take on the genre, especially for the time. The movie also offered an interesting commentary on the commodification of relationships.
I'm going to be in town until Sunday. I'd like you to spend the week with me.
That's becoming a dream come true.
While it avoided the heavy-handed social critique of the original script, Pretty Woman still subtly addressed class dynamics and the power of money. Edward was a wealthy man who treated their relationship as a transaction, but as the story progressed, he learned that real relationships are based on more than just money. The film's new hopeful ending, where Vivian decides to change her life and even pursue an education, gave it an uplifting, feel-good quality that resonated with audiences. Rather than leaving viewers with a sense of despair, the movie offered hope and the promise of change. Now, let's be clear. The original version of Pretty Woman wasn't without its merits. If it had been made, it could have sparked important conversations about the realities of sex work and the darker side of society.
I was too ashamed to go home. That's when I met Kit.
The story of Vivian's struggles, alongside the challenges she faced with her roommate Kit, would have made for a more grounded and honest exploration of the harsh realities of their lives.
Sure don't fit in down on the boulevard looking like you do. Not that you ever did.
Well, thanks. But it's easy to clean up when you got money.
Yeah.
In the original script, Kit's character was portrayed as a sickly woman, dealing with the effects of drugs, and Vivian's struggles were far more raw and gritty. The issues of survival, addiction, and the economic consequences of their lifestyle were explored in depth. However, this darkness also made it much harder to imagine Pretty Woman becoming the commercial success that it was. The film's original version was much closer to a grim social commentary.
Land of dreams. Some dreams come true, some don't. But keep on dreaming. This is Hollywood.
Than the feel-good rom-com audiences flocked to see. And while 3000 may have been more realistic in some ways, it also lacked the optimism and charm that Pretty Woman brought to the table. And most people don't go to the movies to be reminded of the harsh realities of life.
Sure you won't come with me?
And leave all this? Not in a million.
Instead, they want a story that provides a little escape and leaves them with a sense of satisfaction. And that's exactly what Pretty Woman gave its viewers. It's interesting to think about what 3000 could have been, and how it would have impacted the cultural landscape if it had been made as intended. Would it have been more critically acclaimed? It certainly could have sparked conversation about social issues like classism, addiction, and commodification of human relationships. However, it's also possible that it would have been too dark for most audiences, limiting its reach and making it a less commercially viable project. The reality is, Pretty Woman struck the right balance between addressing tough issues while still giving audiences a happy, uplifting ending. Its success proved that there was room for a more optimistic take on the rom-com genre, and it set the stage for future films that explore relationships and love in new ways. Pretty Woman didn't just change the movie landscape for a few years, it left a lasting mark on the rom-com genre. It helped usher in a new era of rom-coms that didn't shy away from exploring real-life issues, but still provided audiences with hope and a satisfying resolution. The film's success also paved the way for stronger female characters in the genre, characters like Vivian, who are assertive, capable, and self-aware. At the same time, Pretty Woman also made room for more nuanced male leads. Edward was far from perfect.
To spend the next 3 days fighting with you. I said I was sorry, I meant it. That's the end of it.
And his growth throughout the film made him more relatable to audiences. He wasn't just a wealthy, smooth-talking hero, he was a man who had flaws, who had to confront his own limitations and change in order to have a real relationship with Vivian. So, what if Pretty Woman had remained true to its original script 3000? Would it have been a cult classic or an unrecognized film? It's hard to say, but one thing is clear. The version we got, with its mix of realism, romance, and optimism, was a major cultural moment. While the original draft may have been more raw and real, Pretty Woman captured the hearts of audiences around the world because it gave them a glimpse of love's potential, even in the most unlikely circumstances. In the end, Pretty Woman became the rom-com we needed, and maybe, just maybe, we're all a little better for it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and make sure you subscribe to Director's Cut for more awesome content like this.